Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that should probably stop asking for predictions about what the Christian nationalists are going to do next. They seem to be taking it as a dare. Tonight, I am going to be joined again by old friend of the show, Marie LePage. Marie, you and I have probably had the most diverse conversations that I have had with any Secular Sexuality guest, because we have covered everything from designer relationships and polyamory and sex positivity to soulmates and kind of a number of things in between. Thank you so much for coming back tonight.
Oh, I'm super glad to be here. Just so people know, I used to be Marie Delafont, and now I go by Marie LePage, which is my real name because I'm out and unmasked.
Ooh.
Yes.
Unmasked. Yeah. Well, so tonight we are going to be peering through our neurotypical masks to see what sex looks like with ADHD. So if you are one of the 25% of people who is neurodivergent or have dated someone who is, give us a call. We're at 512-991-9242, or you can reach us at tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is coming right now. All right, well, that sound means that we are starting this week the way we do every week. Marie, super excited to have you back. What's got you turned on this week?
Well, I've got a lot of stuff I'm super interested in, but the thing that I'm jamming on right now is a show on HBO called Infinity Train.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend told me about it. They said it's basically like Adventure Time, but for adults. And I won't give away the
I think
entire...
a lot of adults watching this show just got a little insulted, but also I'm okay with that.
But no, but I love so I watch Adventure Time, right?
Sure.
But it's more thematically about adult kind of things. But it's a really great, the storyline is a really great metaphor for what I'm understanding as the process of kind of healing and throughout your life as you kind of get to know yourself and reflect on the influences that have been in your life, and then how you've kind of metabolized them and how they've made you who you are, and then gaining the consciousness to make a different choice for your life. So it's about kind of gaining that autonomy through that cognitive healing, and it's done in such a beautiful way. And I'm super into Infinity Train.
Yeah, I love when somebody describes a show to me without telling me anything at all about the characters, the setting, the premise, just describing this is the story or the meaning, I guess, the thesis of this show. That gets me excited. Definitely sounds like it's something worth checking out.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, man, I am very, very, very honestly just turned on by the idea that after 2 years of pandemic and of hustle and hard work and everything else, I have a very, very, very rare opportunity to enjoy a weekend home alone coming up. So what I am most turned on by is just going to be the opportunity to spend a day without having to interact or be around another human being, which is a beautifully rare commodity these days.
I see you, introvert here. Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and to be able to, I suppose, just kind of let your hair down and be yourself and not have to
Tell me
perform
about it.
for
Yeah.
anybody, which is really what we wanted to get into tonight.
Exactly.
A little bit of table setting, I guess. Can you walk us through terms like neurodivergent and like masking?
Partially, I can, right? So I'm new to understanding my neurodivergent diagnosis, and so I'm here speaking not as a professional, but as a a participant in this
Sure.
neurological sphere. So anything that I say tonight should be taken with a grain of salt. I'm certainly not expert on anything, but my understanding is that neurodivergence is a label for the kinds of brains that have different neurological and cognitive functionings, and that includes the realms of ADHD, anyone that relates to being on the spectrum. I believe also Down's syndrome and a couple of other things, right?
Yeah, a lot of people define it in different ways. Oftentimes, you will see it sort of end with sensory processing and dyslexia. Other people like to expand that term to include folks who have experienced trauma or any like physical change to their neurobiology.
Mm.
It's a kind of a new idea. I can put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in terms of masking, right? So again, very specifically, this one, I can only speak on my own behalf. But masking is, for me, at least in the past, a subconscious, unconscious restriction of my behavior to commodify or to fit in with what I have internalized that society expects out of me in any given situation. Um, yeah, and some people experiencing masking profoundly throughout the day, throughout their life, and if you're living that kind of a life for a long period of time, you can experience a lot of peripheral comorbid, like other issues like depression and anxiety and that sort of thing. So masking can be just life stealing with, so that's what masking is. It's not intentional. I never knew I was masking.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
had no idea. In fact, I was coaching people who were neurodivergent and telling me that they were masking, and I was like, oh no, that sucks. Like, oh, you could be yourself around me. And then I find out, oh shit, I've been masking for like 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it like some boarding school where children are seen but not heard. And sometimes it's that explicitly enforced idea, but as often as not, it just sort of turns into, well, this is the way everybody else behaves. This is the way I behave.
Mm,
And kind of tamping yourself down until you really even forget that you're doing it, or you're
yeah.
trying to like fit in, and it just becomes automatic,
Yeah.
even though it can be terribly exhausting.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like when I was masking, it felt like I was mold, and that like whatever came into my space, I just kind of conformed myself to fit into it.
Hmm.
And now like that I'm becoming more aware of my neurodivergence and my all of the things that were related to that, I feel more like I'm a proactive self, like I'm pushing myself outwards and letting people know where my boundaries are, who I am, what I need, instead of conforming. And so it obviously intersects a lot with like codependency can show up a lot in folks who are struggling with this as well.
Yeah. Well, so I have been kind of following along your story online and just getting excited about some of the things you've been discovering about yourself. What can you share with us about what the last year or so has been like for you?
Oh my God, y'all, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. So and I'll say that it probably started with shrooms, but we'll just move on from there. But
Sure.
like, so that's that was a kind of eye-opening experience. But I to make a long story short, I found out that I had ADHD last October. And so since then, I've been kind of going through just a lot of mental reorganization, a lot of coming to terms with who I am, what my life has been, a lot of childhood memories coming up that I had repressed, a lot of pulling things together. My life started to make sense. A lot of my experiences started to make sense. The reason why I was struggling with so many things started to make sense. And once they made sense, I started developing compassion and love for myself by understanding my narrative, by understanding why I was who I was, which I wasn't. That's because I wasn't me, because I didn't know how to be myself, because I didn't understand myself. And so since October, I've been doing a lot of self work, a lot of self exploration, a lot of digging into what I call like secular sexuality, or excuse me, secular spirituality. I tried
Mm-hmm.
to honor the parts of me that were injured in Christianity. and to engage in a self-knowledge that sometimes feels like what God used to feel like, but it's just me. And so I'm finding the ability to be happy, that I apparently have that ability once I, got to know myself better. But yeah, a lot of my experiences with masking before all of this, and still, because I'm still having to become aware of it and to confront it. A lot of it shows up in a word I'll use is like paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
Like you know, I'm just going to be meta right now. I'm looking at myself on a screen right now. I'm looking at myself talking, and it brings up a kind of a paranoia, being hyper aware of how I look, of how I sound. And my brain is experiencing the vast amount of people, the vast thousands of people watching me and judging me and critiquing every little thing about me. And oddly enough, I imagine that they're critiquing the very things that I'm self-conscious about, like my semi-discolored front tooth, or like the fact that I have wrinkles, or that my hair is a little bit messy. So I experience masking in feeling that in a very loud level in my head, and then not saying it. So me saying it right now is my intentional choice to unmask and say that it's difficult to be in my mind with a lot of this paranoia. I'm hyper vigilant about how my body is positioned, how I'm sitting, how I'm standing. Is this thing sticking out? Is that thing sticking out? And it, depending on whether my brain says that I'm okay or not, I feel safe or not, and the rules in my brain are completely arbitrary. They just kind of make it up. And I don't know how these things got in there, but I realized it one day when I was in Target and I was standing in an aisle, and I felt like, am I in someone's way? And I kept looking all around and no one was there. But then I kept on seeing out of the corner of my eye, is someone coming down? So I was so hyper vigilant about getting out of somebody's way, and there was nobody there. And it's a small example, but it's a big example of what my life has been like in general. Like always, like I said, being that mold, getting out of everyone else's way, accommodating everyone else, and to such an extreme extent that I'm in a constant state of hypervigilance, whether it's externally or whether it's internally. Hypervigilant with my thoughts, hypervigilant with how I talk to myself, hypervigilant about all these things. And so that's a lot of what my masking has felt like, and it shows up in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
in particular with my primary partner. I don't know if I like that word, but the domestic partner that I have, the one I'm
Sure.
most attached to, the most enmeshed with, I experience it the most masking there, which is surprising to me.
Yeah, no, it shows up in the most pervasive ways. And like in particular, the places where our default mode network is kicking in, where we're maybe like less intentional or active about what we're doing. I often think about it like the experience of trying to give up smoking, or something along those lines. You think to yourself, oh, I want a cigarette. Nope, I shouldn't have a cigarette. Oh, I'm a little bit annoyed by that. Oh, wait, what was that guy saying? I'm supposed to be paying attention here. And
Mm-hmm.
that like constant amount of mental work that is put into, well, don't stim if you are somebody on the autism spectrum who stims, or
Yeah.
some of these other ideas around, don't interrupt people. Like, how do I force myself to be the type of person I'm, quote, supposed to be in
Yeah.
our civilized society, when my brain is a little bit different from what's supposedly civilized?
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the interruption part, because that's something I'm having a hard time with, because I'm dating someone who's neurodivergent as well, and they like to tell stories, and
Mm.
some of my, I don't know, I don't want to label things. It's just I have a hard time interrupting people. And so it turns out then that I don't interrupt him, and then he keeps telling his story, and by the time he's finished telling his story, my poor mind is exhausted from trying to listen to the story, retain the story, have something interesting to say, try not to forget it, try not to forget it, try not to forget it, try not to forget it. And like, so like it's a whole exercise. It's exhausting. And so I've noticed that it's just incredibly difficult for me to interrupt him and be like, hey, dude, I'm like losing track of your story. Can we like hold on a second? Or like anything, just saying anything like, hey, I'm not here anymore. I'm not paying attention
To just
anymore. Or
acknowledge what's going on, to be present and sincere
yeah,
in that sense. I mean,
yeah,
it's
because
really challenging because people feel insulted oftentimes, even though we're just looking to be sincere and even to increase the level of connection by letting them know what our experience is.
exactly. I don't want to infantilize him and patronize him by, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, okay. Good story. Good story. Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Like it doesn't feel good in me, and that's not good for him. But it's hard. Yeah, it's just hard. As a specific example, it's hard to interrupt. And be like, I have something to say now too. Like,
Sure.
and especially if you have ADHD and you struggle with your working memory, and you're listening to a story that's this long, and you keep on having a thought right there, right there, right there that you'd
It's
like to
hard to hold on to
share.
them.
Yeah, and you can't hold on to them. And every time a thought escapes my head that I want to share, I die a little inside because I have so many years of experience of a faulty or a different functioning working memory that
Hmm.
I've had to compensate for, that I've always felt uh, terrible and embarrassed about and apologetic for. There's a potential that in this next hour, I'm going to be in the middle of a sentence and then we'll have to say, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. I don't know what I was talking about. Can you remind me? And that's fucking embarrassing,
Mm.
but it's a reality for me, and I'm not going to mask it anymore. I'm going to advocate for my brain, and I'm not going to apologize for what it does, and I'm not going to be embarrassed of it anymore. And so speaking up and saying like, oh, I just forgot what I was saying, can you remind me? Or learning, like for example, like sometimes I forget what I'm saying, and if I give myself 20 seconds of compassion and I just kind of wait, my brain brings it back up. Whereas in the past, I would just be like, if my brain forgot what I was saying, it would get really aggressive and like hostile, like, how could you forget what you're
And
saying
that's
again?
the
And like,
social pressure, and that's
yeah,
the challenge of being neurodiverse in a neurotypical world, and why we mask, why we try and make it work by looking like we're supposed to look, and
yeah,
following that script.
yeah. Yeah, like today I should have dressed up more, right? But I'm wearing, and I don't need anyone, to tell me that I look fine or anything. It's a thing inside of me, right? That says, oh, I'm supposed to be looking this way. Christy has a suit jacket on. Why do you have a shirt that looks like a prisoner striped shirt from like the 50s? Like, and you haven't even showered today. What are you doing? And I was like, oh, so it's like, it's stuff like that, like that you feel self-conscious about, but I'm enough. I'm
Mm.
okay. Like my brain is enough as it is, and so I think that's one of the great things about leaning into. A lot of the people I talk to about neurodivergence in my coaching work are afraid to get diagnosed because they don't want to be labeled, and
Sure.
they don't want society to label them. And that's legitimate and that's fair. And that is a real problem. That is a real bias issue. And I have experienced that the benefits of embracing, leaning into learning about these labels, even if you don't want to take the label on for yourself, at least explore the realm of what that means for people, can be so empowering, and you can get to know yourself better and lead a life that is better suited to your brain. And my life has changed incredibly since October, just incredibly. And I really just thought that my biggest life accomplishment would be dying at 80 saying, I tried really, really hard. Nobody can say I didn't try hard. That was my big goal. And now I already achieved it. Like I won't say I'm happy. I feel like I found what I was looking for, like,
Mm.
which was me.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to acknowledge diagnosis here, because when we talk about really any form of neurodivergence, our diagnostic criteria are really messy. We're just frankly bad at diagnosing it as a medical establishment. That's without even talking about access to appropriate diagnostic tools, how expensive some of these tests can be, and all of those challenges. And then all of the heavy, heavy biases. that are included. In particular, women are very rarely diagnosed or offered a neurodivergent diagnosis. That is kind of a part of what we're talking about here, because women tend to mask much more than men and are much more likely to have a late in life diagnosis. I also hear stories of people being told that they are too capable, too competent to be neurodivergent. That, somebody who's neurodivergent couldn't possibly be succeeding the way that you're succeeding, so
Yeah.
you must not have it, which is really problematic, because while we don't have great numbers, if you take a glance around the internet, anywhere from about 10% to about 35% of all people are neurodivergent. I know I've already kind of quoted some different numbers today and in some of the promotional materials for this show, and that's because we don't have anything like good and locked in. And it's something I think that is important for other culture to be talking about more and to acknowledge more than we do.
Mm-hmm. And something that came up for me as you were talking about that is like, what is the standard for success in someone who is neurodivergent? Because, like, I had some clients, a couple, and one was on the spectrum. I think the other probably had ADHD. And the ADHD one was speaking of the one on the spectrum, saying, like, oh, he's getting really better at this. This thing doesn't seem to bother him as much anymore. He used to do this a lot, and now he's getting a lot better. And I was like, or is he just masking? And he was right there next to her, and he's like,
Yeah.
yep, I'm just masking. And I was like, yeah, so what is the standard for success? What is the standard for whatever we want to call recovery or coping with or embracing our neurodivergence? Is it coping to, like, is it being as productive the way that we're supposed to be productive and doing the things that we're supposed to be doing? Or do we get to define for ourselves what success as a neurodivergent person means? And for me, it means something very different than what I've been told. And I think that's what's really important within the psychological community, is to do patient first work, because we are so incredibly unique and we know what we need. And it's important to center on what is distressing to us folks and what is not. And don't try to fix shit that's not broken, and let us just be ourselves and determine for ourselves, what do we want to work on? What do we want to change, and why?
Yeah, and also to extend some understanding to one another as we work to be less ableist and more accepting, that we don't take it as a insult that our partner wasn't paying attention,
Mhm.
particularly in the context of like a tense argument or some really stressful situation, and instead recognize that their brain simply works differently than ours, not really even better or worse. Perhaps there are certain capacities that are different, but we can make space for that
Yeah.
rather than trying to cover it up and then judge ourselves and each other for being like mediocre at being neurotypical instead of being excellent at being ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know that I've experienced so much more success in my relationships, in my job, in everything that I do, ever since I've embraced and leaned into my diagnosis, and I speak up for it. In fact, I feel even more comfortable on the show. Being on the show is stressful, not specifically this show, but being live, having people watch, that kind of thing, is
Sure.
really stressful. But now I go into these things with a different attitude. I'm not here to try to perform and be somebody that's really well put together. My goal here is to have as much integrity as possible, like that the things that come out of my metaphorical heart come out of my mouth relatively unfiltered. And that is what I'm going to call success. Not, did I look this way? Did I talk that way? Did I build off of Christy's last statement in a relevant enough way?
Sure.
Like, am I derailing it? Am I, like all this shit? Like, I just, now I just want to be myself. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think it's the change I want to see in the world. And I want to, I think by doing that, I mean, I'm trying to encourage other people to, like, this is what this looks like, for me anyway, to
Sure.
be vulnerable, to be real, to be honest, and not have it be like to feel bad about being honest about how your brain works. Like the little that I did explain about my brain just, 5-10 minutes ago, if you rewind and go back, you're not going to see shame. You're not going to see me apologizing for it. I don't do that anymore. It's just facts. This is just kind of how this works, and just to embrace that and just to relax into your brain,
Yeah. So broadly speaking, I'm hearing you say that we should just own our differences and our identity and be
Mhm.
transparent and sincere. But with that, are there any maybe particular strategies that you have tried, or any particular thought processes that have helped you in reducing or in ending some of these masking habits?
Yeah, and I was just looking over at my notes here. I'm not going to mask that I didn't take notes and didn't prepare this question ahead of time. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I've been doing since October that have helped me, and one of them is kind of changing my life philosophy. I think that I was unconsciously very wedded to the American um, narrative about how to be a human, and I already left Christianity. I know what it feels like to abandon a belief, and I'm doing it again. I am abandoning the belief that I need to be exceptional, that I need to make a certain amount of money, that I need to look a certain way. Um, and so, really changing what I think living is, like changing the philosophy of what it means to live and what are my values. That's been a big game changer. I didn't come to that naturally though. So like if you're not there, you're not there. Wait until you get there. But that was one thing that helped me. Also surrounding myself with really open-hearted people, whether they're neurodivergent or otherwise, people who understand the diversity of humanity, not just the beauty of neurodivergence, but the beauty in all of humanity, including the evangelical Christians that we are often complaining about. They are also being impacted by all these layers of society and messaging and religion that's been around here for a very long time. We're all struggling and we're all hurting, and I can relate to it. And so developing compassion and being around compassionate people, it's really hard to continue to hate yourself, and to
Mm-hmm.
beat yourself up when you surround yourself with those kinds of people and you raise your standards for what kind of hearts you want to hang out with. Um, I think another thing that's helped me, and again, I want to make the point that this isn't accessible for everyone. I realize that there's danger, there's risk in all of this, but this is just assuming that these are accessible things. I just want to put that disclaimer
Fair.
in there. But for me, another thing that has helped is talking about it all the time. Like not
Sure.
not
Yeah.
overwhelming people, but just like in conversation. Just if it's relevant, just be like, oh hey, if you, my friend wants to hang out with me on Saturday morning because I walked past her house and she's like, hey, let's hang out on Saturday morning. I'm like, great. I'm on a walk right now. I'm not going to write this down. I've got ADHD. Would you mind being accountable for texting me to remind me that we talked about this so I can get it on my calendar? And she's like, totes my goats. And I'm like, sweet. And so like it's normalizing that. It's not being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Could you just could you
Yeah.
meh? Like,
Or
no,
saying that you'll remember,
yeah.
and then having like a 25-50% chance of forgetting, and then being so angry and upset with yourself and beating yourself up so that next time a situation like this comes up, you're so ashamed that you
Yeah.
can't even think about speaking up,
Yeah.
and you beat yourself up even more when it happens again. And it I'm glad that you're breaking that cycle.
Oh my God, I'm glad I am too. And I didn't think that life could get better, and it did. And I think another thing that I think the one of the two big things that really helped, I hired an ADHD coach.
Mm,
There is such a thing, and her name is Tracy Winters, and she's amazing. And there is nothing like talking to someone who understands your brain, like the kind of validation that I've been dying for. It's amazing. And like, again, I'm narrowing in on ADHD, but I'm sure there's analogous things for all other forms of neurodiversity as well. But there's a group called ADD.org, and you can sign up for a membership for like $50 a year. and you can go to all these online groups and stuff, and there's like even an ADHD group for entrepreneurs, because we are incredibly creative people. And it's just, I've showed up in those groups and I just like like they're all speaking my language. Oh my God. And you feel like, oh my God, I didn't even know I had a first language. It feels like you've been speaking in the second language your whole life, and that you forgot that you had a first language. And then so reconnecting with this part of myself and connecting with people who relate to it makes me feel like, oh, I do belong. I am a human being.
Neurodiversity is my mother tongue. Yeah,
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think that was most, I mean, boundary setting also is really
Sure.
important, because with ADHD, at least, there's a lot of codependency that can come from that due to like insecure attachment styles. So, so learning about how to communicate about your boundaries is really helpful, but to be able to communicate about your boundaries, you really kind of have to connect to yourself. And so there's a lot of self connection stuff that needs to be done. And that's hard, especially for us that maybe have come out of Christianity and been experienced spiritual abuse. It can be a scary place to go back into, because
that type of introspection and spiritual connection with the self. Yeah.
Yeah, especially as like, where are you going to find a community that's going to help you facilitate that without them bringing their woo into it and then thus triggering you? And so I'm concerned about our community. When I say our, I mean people recovering from spiritual abuse in Christianity. I'm concerned about us, because I have determined, at least for me, that my healing comes from connecting to myself, but I've been avoiding it or afraid of it because I've put a barrier up around that center part of myself because of all of this stuff, man. And now,
Which is fair to do, you know. I'm glad that you're pushing through it, but let's also acknowledge the validity of that choice, so long as the folks who are listening to my voice right now are thinking intentionally about this as a choice rather than a reaction.
Right. And I think, I'm curious to see what you think about this, Christy, but I also, in our over pathologizing mental illness society, I want to challenge at least maybe some of the negativity associated with the word masking, as if like, oh, I'm masking, like, and that's
like you
bad.
have to fix it. Yeah.
And they say like it's something to fix, but humans aren't broken. And so when I look back at my life and I think about everything that's led me up to here, I don't feel bad about masking. I feel like, holy shit, my brain is so smart, because it went through all of this abuse and it was just like, we're just going to shut this down. We're just going to turn it off. And if you're miserable for 2 decades, it's fine. Just keep trucking along, you know? So like, I see it now, like, for the beauty that it was. Yes, it all hurt and stuff, but I don't know, like, there's something incredibly beautiful about that. And I hope that's not hard for some people to, so I'll only speak for myself, that just reflecting back, I'm incredibly grateful and in awe of my human body and of my consciousness to be able to do these things behind the scenes, to block me from seeing me. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it's about appropriateness. I think that's the only thing to be said about it. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a customer service voice or putting a little bit of a lacquer or a nice veneer on the way that you express yourself. But we want to be aware of that thing, because nobody wants to be married to a car salesman. Like, they want to see the sincere you in that type of environment. And so just being mindful and intentional and self-aware about these things, which, as we've pointed out, can be incredibly challenging. So I hope that there are folks who are listening to this who are not like just throwing a diagnostic label on themselves and having themselves a pity party, but that are rather realizing that this is way more common than we realize, that this may explain some of the friction in your life. And by becoming aware of that fact, you might be a little bit more empowered to do something to benefit yourself. None of us are broken. None of these are things that need to be fixed. But a little bit of self-awareness can go a long way towards making life more pleasurable to live.
Yeah, one other thing that turns me on is the show Moon Knight, the new Marvel show that's
Sure.
come out. I will not give any
I
spoilers.
was about to say I did not catch last night's episode. Let's be mindful.
I didn't either. So all I'll say is that something that I've gotten from that show is that, or rather an experience of my own that it has validated at a corporate like media Marvel level, is that sometimes all you have to do is just witness it.
Yeah.
Just by looking at it. Because I think for a long time, I felt like I had to fix it. I had to make a plan, a strategy. I'm a project to be fixed. And I'm slowly learning that just by looking at it in the eyes and saying, this is what this is, it can calm down. The distress can reduce just by witnessing. It's just crazy. All this like American, like I'm gonna get zen. Like it's just letting go and being soft and gentle and just witnessing and holding space for yourself to be sad and have whatever feelings you need to have about that which you are.
Well, fair to say. I'll tell you what, we've got a small stack of calls coming in. So let's go ahead and speak quickly to Drew in Oklahoma. Drew, what's on your mind tonight?
Hi. Well, I just saw the questionnaire and the answer and topic and wanted to call in because this one, as a neurodivergent person, I was interested in the masking discussion, but that came up after I had already called in. Instead of ever really masking, I'm on the autism spectrum, and my mom just introduced me to etiquette videos really young. And so I had rules that I could rely on instead of masking because it was just actually being taught that. But
yes, there's a level of intentionality of knowing that you're following the script rather than on a like internal level, awkwardly berating yourself without realizing it for struggling to follow the script. Is that at all a fair way of describing it for you?
Absolutely. I just think that we don't actively teach people enough who are neurodivergent, give them a chance to try to learn the rules of society, because it's just, we don't do that stuff anymore. Etiquette
I don't know. I would challenge you, Drew, because there are no rules of society. There's just the rules of your demographic, you know, like your
class. Yeah.
Yeah. So there aren't really any rules, and you could learn rules and then go.
I wouldn't necessarily say rules of society, but not necessarily that there are rules of society, but if you have a pre-programmed set of rules you can rely on as this is a good way to be, if not social, polite and acceptable.
A codified
when you're
etiquette.
Yeah, that's why I think I come off more as eccentric, not weird, because I'm probably overly more formal and polite. But I'm not saying that this is like a need to do thing. I just think it's a great tool for people who want to learn these subtle things about socializing.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, there's a show called Love on the Spectrum, and I'm sure people have varied opinions about that, and that's not the point I'm trying to make. But there is a person that comes onto the show who coaches. So they're like a person who coaches people on the spectrum who need social skills. And so she doesn't really explicitly say this or say that, but like more general things of like, you know, if you're having a conversation with someone, try to find out if you have something in common in interests. And so it's like things like that. So it's not explicit, but more general, like how do you get someone to feel connected, and like how to get conversation flowing and that kind of thing. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe it applied more when I was a really little kid.
Sure.
But also, since the topic was more about the love life, I've just found, I think it's my neurodivergence in this case, but it hasn't ever been very important to me, because I think it ties into one of my side effects of autism combined with face blindness. I never think that people are talking about me, and so assume that nobody is, and that nobody ever worries about if you're talking. That I have trouble believing people worry about what other people think of them. And so I think I'm the same way. Romance stuff is like, that sounds nice. I could get to that eventually, but it's not pressing because there's no external feeling that people are judging me for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredibly fair. Like we've been saying, like, defer to your brain. If you're comfortable in, then that's good.
Yeah. So before we take on our next caller, Drew, is there anything in particular that you might be able to pass on? Any particular advice about how to be more transparent or sincere, or maybe present could be a better term for it, in maybe in a romantic setting, or really just in your social life?
I think that one of the biggest problems is that people put too much emphasis on spectacle with romantic stuff. They assume that the actions have to be different because the emotion behind them is different. When I think just explaining the context, an action that could be a friendly gift can just as well be a really romantic action. And
I think I understand what you mean. Just like allowing behaviors to kind of bleed between romance and platonic. Is that what you're kind of saying? Allowing, maybe. Oh no,
I was saying that I was saying that I feel people separate them too much, and so they feel that they can't do something that might normally be platonic because romance has to be something more. When the something more probably just comes from it being romantic instead of it needing to be a truly different action. It's the emotional context that matters more than the physical activity.
Yeah, well, and I think it encourages us to be explicit, to say, I'm giving this to you because, and I was hoping to express this feeling, or this is the idea that I wanted to share with you. And I think building a more accepting, a less ableist, a more like neurodiverse, accommodating world involves a lot of being willing to explain ourselves, like being willing to say the quiet part out loud and be explicit in ways that we've been socialized to think is somehow like tacky or weird or wrong. And I really reject that. Yeah, I really want to encourage everybody to be willing to be explicit and to not feel like they have to be suave and charming by being secretive, particularly if you're in a neurodiverse relationship.
Yes, that's it exactly. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that for us, and I think giving us all permission a little bit, because it can feel very prescriptive to tell people, like, you need to use more words. But when we start to recognize how it actually shows up in our lives and the complications and the pain that it can cause by being sly or shy, it becomes a little bit more clear why we communicate with each other.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much for calling. You have a wonderful night. All right. Well, let's take a moment and see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA. You have permission to get out of your head, to stop worrying about what a bullshit culture or a hypothetical future person or a bunch of 2,000-year-old Jewish poetry has to say about the subject. Enjoy your life.
This is a really good example. Two examples of two polar opposite abortion calls.
Yes.
You could choose the John way, or you could choose the right way to do these calls. We can be civil, or we can get our teeth out.
Atheists are here to ruin your fun or whatever. Like, that seems to be what
But Jessica,
we
we
end
are.
up with over and over. Oh my god, I hate fun. I famously hate fun. Thank you for bringing that up so I can talk about it now.
No
Fun
problem.
is terrible.
Stephen, I was taught a lot of stuff too when I was younger, and which was every part of my life I was younger than I am right now. And historically speaking,
but back when you were Johnny P. Cherub.
The origin of life is irrelevant to whether or not we. The origin of life is irrelevant to what. Would you shut the up and listen to me, Jay? I'm answering your question, and then you won't be as ignorant as you were before.
I feel like we're talking to an evangelical Christian meme generator.
All right, well, let's touch base with Emily in Australia, who wanted to talk to us about asexuality. Emily, what's on your mind tonight?
Hi. And thanks for bringing up that I want to talk about asexuality, but I'm also ADHD. And I just want to say, Marie, do you think it took so long for you to get diagnosed because ADHD is seen as a little boy's disease?
Like at a social level, definitely. There's a little echo in the back, or what is that?
That might be my baby.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Hi, baby. Life happens. Hello, baby. Hi, Emily's baby. Let's see. So I think factually, very likely I didn't get diagnosed because of society defining ADHD as hyper boys. Society already socializes people born with vaginas to be compliant, to mask, to sit still. And so if you see a hyperactive boy who has ADHD and a ADHD girl who's quiet, there is more internal distress in that girl because she's holding it all in. And that was me in my childhood, and nobody saw it because I wasn't expressing it outwards, because I was already taught at a multitude of other levels that it was not okay for me to be big, and that was a constant recurring theme in my childhood, is constantly feeling like I'm too big, I'm too loud, I'm too noisy, I'm too nerdy. Nobody likes me. How do I temper this? There was emails with my sister going back and forth about like, how can I stay calm when I go to youth group? I get all excited and talk, and then people get annoyed, and and just nobody saw it. And then moreover, like the family system I was born in was not super psychologically savvy, and the school, in the 80s, at least the school I went to, was not as psychologically savvy as how I perceive schools to be now. A lot has changed in society, and we're a little bit more concerned with that. So I think there's a lot of factors. Oh, and then growing up evangelical, of course, because like ADHD, that's to some forms of Christianity or religion, that can be a huge threat to their entire structure, because that they think that like who you are is just like, that's what God made you to be or something. And so you can't actually have like a thing in your brain that makes you act differently or whatever. So there
all
was
of
just
your behaviors are choices, even and especially the sinful ones.
Exactly. Thank you for summarizing up for that for me, because it was hard to put into words. But I think there was a lot of factors involved in that.
Yeah, I didn't get diagnosed till I was 22, and then I told my parents, and they're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Cool, okay."
Thanks. Appreciate your opinion on my brain.
I originally called because I don't know. I was wondering if there was something. So I'm also asexual, and I was wondering if there was something that just is turned off in my brain that doesn't make me experience sexual attraction, or because I didn't have any trauma or anything. Like, this is just how I've always been.
That's a legitimate way to be. Go ahead, Christy.
Absolutely. Well, it's important to recognize that in terms of like a cause or a thing that we could point to on an MRI or something with regards to asexuality, the only thing that we really can say for certain is that there's not a cause, but probably dozens or even hundreds or thousands. I definitely want to echo what Marie said. It's a perfectly valid way to be. It's just a different way of being from the norm, but also in a way, so is everything else.
Yeah.
So I really, really want to recognize that. We don't really know what causes asexuality. You mentioned the idea of trauma, and that's a very complicated notion. Certainly, there are people who experience trauma and then become sort of cut off from their sexuality and may find themselves a home in the aspect community. But also, there are plenty of healthy, happy, wonderful people who have never experienced any sort of trauma to their sexuality, who seem to just be born this way. And perhaps there is a interaction of prenatal hormones as well as some level of socialization throughout life. But that's going to be true of really any major trait. And we can't point towards anything particularly specific. For our conversation tonight, I guess I will highlight that there seems to be an incredible concordance between asexuality and neurodivergence. That might be because neurodivergent people are just more likely to acknowledge their asexuality or to talk about it and to organize themselves around it. But I don't know that that necessarily covers what we see on a statistical level. So we've talked about this episode a couple of times on the show, and I will make sure to have some links in the footnotes, and then I will stop rambling because this is a really interesting question that we don't have a good answer for.
But most importantly, you're okay. You're okay just as you are. I caught myself thinking here, like, would Emily be calling if someone didn't tell her that sexuality was expected of her? Like, do you feel distressed because you feel like you don't match up to society's expectations? Or do you feel distressed because you've always wanted to have sex, but yet you don't, or something like that, you know? So like, that's the interesting thing about psychology, in my opinion, is that most of the DSM, a lot of the criterion have to do with, does the patient experience distress for this symptom in order for that criterion to be fulfilled? And so it's all incredibly subjective. So you get to ask yourself, am I okay with this? Does this feel right inside of me? And if not, what is the direction that I want to go in? And really doing some introspection to see, you know, what might be keeping you from finding that part of yourself.
And I'll just highlight that there's a meaningful difference between distress from a symptom and distress from society's acknowledgement or interaction with that symptom. Not to say that they don't both cause distress, but it's important to recognize what's you and what's your culture, your environment, your family, perhaps. Emily, did you have any other questions for us tonight, or did that help clarify things at all?
I think we might have lost her.
Yeah, so
We
let's
still said
talk
some smart stuff, though.
for sure. Let's talk to Jay in Utah before we go back to the interview. Jay, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey there.
Hi.
I just wanted to call in to just the topic really resonated with me, and hearing Marie talk about their experiences also really resonated. I'm a late diagnosed person with ADHD as well. And after I got diagnosed, there were so many things that just like clicked, like, what? Like, no one else experiences this? And also I think a tricky thing, like thinking back also along those lines, is like not feeling like the what ifs of like, what if I would have gotten diagnosed earlier? Would my life have been different? You know, like things along that line. And I think the main thing that I wanted to talk about was, I guess, a problem that I typically have in my sexual relationships. I typically participate in like ethical, like non-monogamy, and like the majority of my relationships have just been like very like long-term friends with benefits. And one thing that I don't know if this is like I have to overthink, and I have to, but I think a common thing with ADHD that Marie touched on was like hyper focusing on like, okay, like I have to ask about this and ask about that. And like whether it's like STIs and have they been screened recently, and pregnancy, and like all of these, and consent, and what things do they like, what things do they not like, and making sure to get everything on the table. And sometimes that's a really big turnoff, I guess, for a lot of people. But for me, it's like this is what I want to know, like to fully be like mentally engaged with this person. And when that doesn't follow through, or like when that isn't reciprocated, I feel like this really big sense of like, I've looked it up online and done like some there's some research articles that have been written about it. I'm sure Christy, you can speak more about it, but like the idea of justice sensitivity, and like I explicitly told them like these were my boundaries and these are the things I'm comfortable with and what I expect out of this relationship, and they go around and they just disregard all like everything that I just told them. What's happening? So I think that's been something that's really hard to navigate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That need for very explicit communication, especially around any anxious uncertainties, like wanting to be really clear, not leaving it to chance about, well, I don't want to offend this person by talking about their STI health or their, most recent tests or things like that. That's going to be especially hard for somebody who is neurodivergent, and also just bad advice as a person. Like there's so much value in being explicit in the way that we communicate with each other. I think it's one of the reasons that you see in poly communities and in kink communities a lot of people who are neurodivergent, because there's so much explicit and intentional communication as opposed to what is sort of like culturally assumed in much more conventional relationships.
I know that I'm finding it very difficult in the last few months to watch TV where anyone is getting into a kind of a sexual relationship without talking about it, which is, I don't know, all TV ever.
All TV ever, yeah.
You're just like, look at that body, and then you just like jump on it, and then they perform sex, which usually involves a penis going into the vagina and then that vagina orgasming upon contact. So it's like, yeah, it's just it's bullshit. And like, and I'm trying to continually add more explicit conversation to sexual encounters, and I can relate a lot to what you're saying in terms of like, in the past I wasn't explicit, and then things just happen and I just let them happen, and then I just keep betraying my body, and sex never feels quite right. And now I'm moving into a space where I'm being more explicit, and so that means that sometimes when I'm being explicit, I experience this rejection sensitivity of like, are they going to be like, oh, Marie asks for too many things, Marie's too explicit, sex is supposed to be mysterious, and like, can it still be sexy if you literally make an agenda, like. But my experience says that at first, like the transition into that more explicit communicative style is awkward, because you're not used to it. You don't see any modeling of it on TV. You certainly probably haven't seen your parents do it or anyone in your life do it, because nobody talks about sex, first of all.
Yep. So
how the fuck do we know what people are doing and what's normal? So like most of us, we had to learn it on our own, right? And so I'm starting to practice more explicit communication and sexual interactions. But like I said, at first it's awkward, but now I've gotten a little bit more used to it. And now I'm just like, this is the jam, man. Can you just imagine having sex and not worrying about whether the other person is like enjoying themselves, or if this is what they want to do, or if they think that, just there's so much anxiety and rumination that can come from feeling insecure and unattached in sexual interactions. And so I think it's worth it. And like tension transitioning to that style is to be expected, and it's not an indicator that you're going the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. The biggest rejection sensitivity punch to the gut I ever felt was with a a hookup I once had, and I was so excited because I think it had been like maybe like around the year anniversary of when I got my IUD, and I was so excited to talk to them about it, and we're like mid having sex and me just rambling on about how my IUD is amazing and like we don't have to worry about XYZ, and afterwards, come to my surprise, they don't want to see me again because they're like, yeah, that was like that really turned me off. I'm like, oh, darn it, like
addition by subtraction. That's just a good filter.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you that just to relate to you in a very personal and very recent way, I have never really talked to a partner about my period, about period sex. Like, I only just did that maybe 3 weeks ago because I'm going to be seeing some of my long distance partners in about a month from now. And calendar says that I'm going to have my period when I go visit them. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit, now's the time to talk about this, I guess, now that we're unmasking, now that we're being more explicit. And so I had those fears of what you've experienced with that person in the IUD thing of like, if I bring up my period, are they going to be like, ew, can we just delay, ew, right? And especially if you identify as a woman and you hook up with people who are men or whatever, there's a lot of disclaimers in there, but you know what I mean? But like, if you've been socialized as a woman, you likely have internalized men's, I'm gonna say a word. I'm not committed to it, but misogyny, like men's discomfort with women, with how our bodies work, with our periods, our menstruation, even birthing children. We don't need to own that. We do not need to own that. I'm gonna find me a grown ass man who doesn't mind having. I mean, even I would even be fine if he didn't want to have sex, when I'm having my period, and that would be okay. Like it's just a matter of talking about it, but not being shamed that my body's disgusting or something like that. Like all of this can be discussed, and I think maybe that's the most important thing. Not necessarily that the other person is like, yeah, I'll do anything and everything, and you can talk about everything and nothing grosses me out, and I accept everything about you, and I have no boundaries at all, and you're great. But so more so just feeling like you can talk about these things, and that your opinion is important, and that their opinion is important, that you respect each other's boundaries, and that you can have that conversation, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, being able to just communicate around it and acknowledge that there's a conversation to be had is so valuable.
Definitely. I think that idea of like the you factor and the rejection sensitivity around that had brought up like typically like it's been 2 years, I don't know when I'm going to have another like romantic partner again in the near future. But previously, I would wait a certain number of like hookups to like have oral sex with that person because I like was explicitly trying to avoid potential rejection sensitivity because of that internalized misogyny. So I really felt you when you said that, Marie.
I mean, I'll just extend that into body dysmorphia. Like some of the roots of my body dysmorphia have to do with my ownership of men's misogyny and their Barbie request, like and that's part of some of the paranoia that I feel about my body and my posture and the shape of my body, the way that I dress myself for the world. I know inside of me, I speak for no one but myself, that comes from owning the messages that I've ingested from society about men's discomfort with women, with their demand that women be a certain way in order to be consumable. But I'm not a goddamn edible. I'm a person. I'm a full person. I don't, that's me saying that with my words, and words mean nothing. I'm working on getting that into my body as well. And that's a tricky part. But I think one of the first steps is getting it into your words, and then hopefully later it'll merge into your body and your beliefs as well.
Very true.
Yeah, well, Jay, I so appreciate you giving us a call tonight and getting us kicked off, because we are going to continue to discuss how masking and neurodivergence shows up in our sex life.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks
Thank
for
you,
calling.
Emily. Or excuse
Take
me,
care.
Jay.
Yeah, so Jay got the ball rolling, but what else can you tell us about some of the warning signs, or maybe some of the particular challenges that show up when masking is becoming part of our sexuality?
Well, this is an interesting part to talk about because I'm still living it, you know?
Sure.
The challenges, I mean, what are the challenges? It's for me, in my body and in my brain, it feels like the whole world will fall apart if I say something,
Mm.
you know? Something that I find myself doing frequently, and this is difficult for me to be vulnerable while, let's see how many people are watching. 41 people. 41 people are watching me say this now. One of the things that I notice a lot is that I will get so caught up in my thoughts, my ruminations about the interaction, and do I look right? Are they thinking about this? Are they reading into my eyes being closed? Are they reading into the face that I'm making? I'm so concerned about them feeling rejection that I'm not there at all. I'm not experiencing anything in my body. I am performing, and I don't try to do it. It's so overwhelming. It happens kind of on its own. And so that results in me physically masking, which means like often I notice my body is really tense, like almost like down to the bone. I can just feel there's a deep tension in my body while I'm having sex and feeling this way. And I mask it. I don't say anything, because it's like when I try to get my brain to say something, it's just like, no, this is too big of a thing to interrupt. Like, really, you're gonna, like, there's something that feels like sacred about having sex with your partner that you're not supposed to interrupt it. You're supposed to be cool, you know? And like, that's this like,
There's no room for
about
bodily functions. There's no
Yeah.
room for odors or stray hairs or yeah.
No. Yeah. Has to be perfect. And so like I end up just like something I noticed that I do a lot is I end up like moving my hips a lot. Like if I'm underneath and I'm getting like pleasure or something, like I'll move my hips when I don't want to. Like I experience the most pleasure when I don't have to do shit and I just lay there super
Sure.
flaccid, and that because when I lay there super like relaxed, then that means that this little awareness thing that's in my brain goes zoom, and it goes into one little spot, and then I can send it wherever I want to, because I'm not worried about controlling any other
Your
part of
focus and
my
your attention can be where you want it. I mean, really, in a
Yes.
lot of ways, we're just describing mindfulness, which I think we
Yes.
could all benefit from being more mindful during sex. But I want to really highlight the way that masking shows up, like when we're actually in the act of sex. You know, last week we got to talk to performer Sin Sage, and I asked her about what it is like having sex on camera. And she talked about how you are always sort of like turning out towards the camera. Like you're always giving it your best angle. You're always being aware and having to hold in your working memory, hold in your awareness where that camera is. And I feel like that's a beautiful metaphor for what we're talking for here, because there is this like constant desire to be stage worthy, to be putting on a show and a performance without necessarily like having sex because you like having sex, or like being present and experiencing the experience.
It's hard, man. And that's why I like that you brought it back to mindfulness, which again, like I mentioned at the top of the show, can be particularly difficult for people who have experienced spiritual abuse. I've been prescribed meditation for 20 years, and each time I go, fuck you. Do you have any idea what it's like to show up in my mind?
Yeah.
Do you have
Who wants to
any
hang out in
idea?
there?
Nothing good came from that until I got diagnosed and began to understand my mind. Like meditation was actually just traumatic, you know? So like, I just want to put that caveat out there in case that resonates with people, that not everyone can access mindfulness and has trauma around being present that they shouldn't just try to be present, you know, like
Sure.
that there's some trauma there to deal with. But
I'm going to
but
just
for those
quickly, before you move on, interject the idea of backdraft. We don't have to go into any detail, but what Marie is describing here, if it's something you experience when you try to meditate, spend some time Googling that notion and know that finding mindfulness is achievable for everybody, but it can have some discomfort and some pain early on. And there are useful strategies and good professionals that can help you work through that. But Marie, please continue.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for injecting that, because I'd never heard of that word. I'm going to go Google that shit after this. So
it's at least one way of describing it that I really like. Shout out
Yeah.
Christopher Germer, but keep going.
yeah, and I mean, we all got to find our ways to organize our minds, and that can be a unique process. But excuse me, my throat is getting dry after talking this much. But yeah, I think one of the things. Oh, see, I told you I was going to get losing my thoughts. Backdraft.
I will
you.
make sure to have a
told you.
more detailed description of that idea in the notes that accompany this episode, everybody.
Yeah. I was just trying to remember what I was trying to say before that. I just got lost. The ADHD.
Yeah, no,
train
I'm
fell
sorry.
off.
So
No,
we can move on a little bit, but we
Sure.
were talking about the different ways that that we perform and that we feel like we are on stage and that we have to impress people rather than actually just being mindful and present and enjoying the experience for the sake of enjoying the experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That did cue up the thing that I wanted to share about mindfulness. And that's something that I've been working on. And I've kind of had to do it my own way, because I haven't really encountered any materials that talked about it the way that I needed to hear it, which is not unusual at all for ADHD, because we're very unique, the way that we understand things. No, I'm going to go back to me, the way I understand things. But so mindfulness for me, I try to envision like that I define myself as like a spotlight. I think I am a spotlight, and I can watch all of the thoughts in my head, and I can just get enraptured with that story. And that's just my entire existence, is watching all of this stuff going on. And that's all I watch. It's just 24-hour news, CNN, everything's happening. And so mindfulness for me is finding that spotlight, identifying it, and then being able to like hone in on it, and then pointing it. Oftentimes when I'm feeling dissociated or really anxious or something, I'll be like, well, where's my awareness right now? Usually it's watching CNN is the metaphor I'm going to give for that. It's in the stream of consciousness space. And so I'll practice trying to open it up and like intentionally saying, what does my environment feel like? What does it feel like to feel the space of this room? What does it feel like to smell? Like getting grounded, right? And
Sure.
getting into this space and remembering that you have a lot of choices of what you can pay attention to. One of those is CNN in your head, but that's just one thing. And if that's the only thing you're paying attention to, you might mistake that for you. You're the choice. You're the choice behind that spotlight. And that's what's helped me understand mindfulness a little bit better. Like mindfulness is pointing my spotlight in a particular direction so that I can see that I'm not my thoughts. And then in that way, start to actually kind of get to know what the contents of my thoughts are, so I can live my life more consciously and less from the neural pathways that have been so ingrained in me for so long. And a lot of this also has to do for me with ADHD and living in the culture that we live in, is detoxing from urgency culture. And Christy, I think you and I were talking about that earlier. You talked about the sacred pause. I go on these walks where I try to go as slow as I possibly can and stop regularly to drink coffee and sit down and watch the birds and just think about what their culture is like. I once audited a class on geese. I sat in front of them and watched them interact and fight with each other. And I was like, well, isn't this interesting? We have a lot in common. And so like, it's been really healing for me to kind of slow down and remember what story I'm a part of. I don't need to be a part of this American story or whatever it is that we're all doing here. You get to write your own story for all of this stuff. And I like the story where I'm an ape here, and I have a body that's capable of feeling a lot of contentedness with being alive, regardless of what I have access to. So just a lot of that kind of work is helping me get more in my body. So maybe another word is embodiment, I think. I don't know if that's a common thing for neurodiverse people. I know that I've been very disembodied, and I think it's also a consequence of...
is often associated with neurodivergence. Interoception, that sense of what your own emotions are. And, it was noticing that in myself, actually, that led me on a path towards seeking my own diagnosis.
I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that word up, interoception, because the day that I heard that word, which was maybe 4 weeks ago, I was like, there it is.
Yeah, there's a term for it. Right.
It's the ability to be able to perceive your own internal experience. And I feel like mine was very underdeveloped. And I think, again, this weaves into my whole story of my life. I had an eating disorder. I have a lot of habits that are hard to quit. My relationships are really codependent. And I think it's just all intertwined with being disembodied, having poor interoception skills. And then moreover, if you're experiencing something like evangelical Christianity that literally instructs you to cut yourself off from your body and to say
deny
that
the flesh and to listen to the spirit and power through in those ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of humanity is really struggling with feeling disembodied, in particular, perhaps people that are coming out of Christianity and have that kind of spiritual abuse and maybe haven't addressed the fact that they still are a body, and that there is a fullness of life that can be experienced when you connect to that.
Yeah. Well, I find these ideas to be really beautiful for folks who are neurodivergent and for folks who aren't. I mean, these ideas of being more mindful, of more present, maybe slowing down a little bit around our sexuality. I think this is so incredibly important. Just the value of taking a pause and asking yourself, what am I thinking about right now? What am I feeling right now? What am I wanting or needing right now? Instead of trying to perform and play out the porn star script that we have all memorized, or perhaps even worse, working out the type of sex that we are supposed to have in this relationship. Yeah, we don't need Cosmo Magazine's 50 ideas of how to spice up our sex life. We just need to stop doing reruns and trying to recreate the sex that we had last time and the time before that, and just be in the room co-creating and experiencing rather than expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And that makes me think of another practice that I'm working on, which is to get to know what I like, and that's a scary process for some of us, especially if we've been covering up who we are for our whole lives, for whatever reasons. I've had so many clients say, I don't even know what I like. I don't know who I am. And not that long ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell them how to find that out. And that's another thing that I worry about for people suffering from spiritual abuse, is they might be disconnected to their ability to know if they like something or not. And that's kind of interoception a little bit. I like using the metaphor of the heart. I'm not sure if that's literally a thing, but I use it as a way to describe it. But I like to try to practice checking in with my heart or my gut metaphorically. And that's an interoceptive thing where you just kind of look inwards and do I like this right now? Even in this moment, I can ask myself, do I like doing this show right now? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like I'm being myself? And I'm checking my body. And for the most part, yeah, I'm a little anxious, but I feel really good about myself. I feel really safe talking to Christy, and it's things like that. And it's practicing noticing if you like something. And so you can do that at all levels of your life. You can practice, do you like this song? Do you like this song? And what is it about it that you like? Is it the drum beat? Listen, don't answer right away. Listen to it for a little bit and find out, where is your brain going? Is it focusing on the drums? Is it focusing on the piano? Is it focusing on the voice? So like you can take anything in your life and make it an opportunity for you to discover what it is that you like, because sexuality can be such a loaded thing, and it could be a lot to ask you to start practicing this in the bedroom immediately.
Sure.
So it can be cool to try it in different ways. Even the way you dress yourself. Do I like this shirt I'm wearing today? Do I like how my hair looks today? And not in a judgmental way, just like, do I like it? Do I like this food?
Yeah. I think we can recognize that being judgmental and constantly trying to weigh and measure and evaluate everything can drive us crazy, and again lead to more like expectations, which we've said before is the enemy of experience. But being non-judgmental is not the same thing as being non-preferential, right?
Yeah.
Like we can acknowledge that we are not looking to be judgmental of the world, while still recognizing that we'd like to change it. We'd like to be working on it. We'd like to see it be different. Marie, we wouldn't be here having these conversations. We wouldn't be volunteering to try and spread positive atheism throughout the world and to encourage healthy and happy sexuality if we didn't prefer that outcome. And that's not the same thing as being judgmental.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and there's still so much more to say, so much more I'm kicking myself for not having had a chance to talk about. But I wanted to check in and just see if there were any particular pieces of next step type advice that you'd like to recommend for anybody listening. Because I know there are a lot of people in the chat, a lot of people watching right now that are all of a sudden going, oh my God, this might be me. So any routines or practices, a particular book or resource, what comes to mind?
So in terms of resources, the things that really made a difference to me when I got diagnosed, or the things that have made a difference to me over time here, are a couple of books that I read. And I know that I'm recommending books to people with ADHD, and I see you, and I recognize that. And I know that people with ADHD can sometimes prefer audiobooks. So regardless, I'm still going to give the recommendation. If you want Cliff Notes, I could send them to you. But there's a book called Scattered Minds, and it's by someone named Gabor Mate. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. If you just look for Scattered Minds, you'll find that book, and it's about neurodivergence, and it talks a lot about the origins of it. That's a neurological disorder that comes about in infancy, and so it comes about it from that perspective, and that is really what started knitting my whole life together and really just made sense out of everything, and has helped me integrate all versions of myself, which I had felt very disconnected from. I'd always kind of felt like my past was just a movie that I watched too many times. I was very dissociated from it, and I feel much more integrated as a person now. Like I remember having those experiences now, and I understand them better. So Scattered Minds is a really great book for that. And then the second book I'd recommend is called Neurodivergent Mind, and it's by Janara Nierenberg. And I'm not even going to try to spell it, because just Google Neurodivergent Mind and then like add the word book, and then Google will do the rest of the work for you. And it's been so long since I read it, but my brain just has reminded me that it's a really good book. So I don't have any further details, but that was one of the first ones that I read. And it was just I remember it being very illuminating. Those are two really great resources. Plus, if you're talking about ADHD, ADD.org is a really great organization that offers a lot of meetings and that kind of thing. Or getting an ADHD coach like I do with Tracy Winters is incredibly helpful. And just following as many accounts as possible, finding all of the memes, like looking for the hashtags, and just finding
Neurodivergent meme culture is quite excellent.
It's on par, man.
We could have an entire like hour-long philosophical discussion about this, but because neurodivergence is so closely tied to our experience of the world, our consciousness, or our perception, if you will, I feel like our language really fails us. and meme culture is a meaningful antidote for that. I really think that, you know, silly dick jokes printed on pictures from movies that you like may not seem particularly academic or sophisticated, but I do think that there's a sincere value there.
Yes, there is. I mean, that was a huge source of community for me at the very beginning. I've kind of stopped following memes and stuff now because sometimes they can just be like, boy, I do this really shitty thing and it's really funny. ADHD.
Yeah, fair.
And then you kind of giggle, and like, nothing against it. It's just like, for me, I'm going to say a word. I don't really mean it, but like, energetically, that just doesn't really get me where I want to go with this, which I really want to be very productive and compassionate and positive and moving forward and building. And sometimes those memes are just like, sucks to be me, but I'm funny.
Yeah, well, fair to say. Like everything that you find on the internet, take it with a little bit of a caveat and a little bit of wisdom. But Marie, this has been so much fun. It has been way too long since we have had you back. I think we need to work on getting you that 5 timers jacket that I know is now overdue. But for folks who are more curious about you and want to know more about your podcast and about the work that you do, where should people track you down?
Yeah, thanks for letting me peddle my goods, man. Yeah, I do coaching for basically everything I've just talked about. I don't even know how to narrow it down. It's about spiritual abuse, it's about neurodiversity, it's about ethical non-monogamy, religious trauma, all of those things. And so I do coaching, but I also have a podcast that I put out where I kind of talk about these philosophical musings. And so you can find more out about that at marielepage.com. I also do a couple of support groups for ethical non-monogamy that are online and for free and that kind of stuff. I think that's most of the cool stuff that I do. So yeah, marielepage.com.
Okay, awesome. And I will definitely remind people that all of the books that you've talked about, all of your previous episodes with us, as well as so many of the other things that we've discussed tonight, are going to be linked in the show notes to this episode. But for now, I want to remind people about so many of the great offerings and community that exists around the ACA. Of course, at tiny.cc/AEN podcast, you can connect with all of the ACA shows in a quick podcast format. You can find the notes and the references and so much of what we've been discussing in the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group, which is going to be at tiny.cc/FBSSG. This conversation has been much too short, and so if you are catching us live on Thursday night, after the show, Marie and I are going to keep it going at tiny.cc/ACD Discord in the atheist community of Discord. We have yet another incredible shirt to tell you about in our merch store. So please take a look if you haven't already at tiny.cc/merchaca. And the most important part of every week, where we take a quiet moment to get revved up by our sexy crew cam, and take a moment to thank all of the people that help Marie and I look so good. Much too sexy for this cam. Thank you so much for all of y'all's help. And finally, Marie, before we walk out the door tonight, we have covered so much ground, and we have dealt with something that is really like deeply intimate. You know, we're talking about the inside of our own minds, let alone our love lives and our sexuality and our relationships, but that is also huge and societal, and I think overlooked just in terms of like prevalence and significance. With all of that sort of floating through our minds, are there any like final thoughts or any parting words that you'd like to leave with the audience tonight?
My first thought is take a deep breath, because this is heavy. This is really heavy to come to terms with your neurodiversion. It's heavy to recognize the state of culture and what it has caused and what it is repressing and what it's stealing from us. And if you're realizing that you resonate with some of this stuff for the first time, it could be incredibly jarring. And if you don't have the skills yet to manage your reaction to it, you might feel some struggle tonight. So my big thought is to be really gentle and thoughtful and contemplative and compassionate tonight, if at all possible, with yourself. Because I know that this is a playful show and everything, but this is some real shit, and you really do live in your body, and this is really in your mind now. So yeah, be compassionate, because I am too. I know I'm here. I know I'm talking and everything, but I feel it in my body too. This is hard to talk about, and I'm going to have to do some self-care after this and breathe, because I can feel like, my body's a little bit adrenalized and worked up, and I've been looking at myself talking all night and not looking at the comments because my rejection sensitivity would be too much, and I just can't do it. So take care of yourself.
Yeah, well, I'll let you know you're getting a lot of love in the comments. It has absolutely been too long since you've been here, but I'll just reiterate that pain, that resistance, that backdraft, if you will, is totally valid and worth taking good care of. So we will always encourage people to take good care of themselves, but in particular, this is a great moment for you to find a little bit of mindfulness, to be sincerely yourself, and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242, or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.